Okay, why don't we get started? Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sujay Liu, a professor of electrical engineering and computer sciences here. It's my pleasure, a distinct pleasure and honor to have a fireside chat with our guest here, Diane Green. There's a nice short biography of her in your programs, but I thought I could just supplement that information with some additional information. So today, Ms. Green, or Diane, serves of course, she's CEO of Google Cloud, and she's successfully co-founded and led one company to IPO, but sold 3 companies. She presently also continues to serve on the board of directors for Alphabet Incorporated. She's also a life member of the MIT Corporation, which is essentially the board of trustees for Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And she also, in the past, served on the board of Intuit for over 10 years. Information on her background: she has ties to Berkeley. Well, let's start from the earlier degree. She earned her bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Vermont. And she actually received an honorary Doctor of Science degree from this university last year. Congratulations. After that, she went on to earn a master's degree in naval architecture from MIT. And then she ended up earning a Master's of Science degree in computer science here at UC Berkeley. So we're really proud to award her a Distinguished Alumni Award a few years ago here at UC Berkeley. And Diane serves on the advisory board for our College of Engineering. And she's graciously given commencement speeches for the College of Engineering and also for a College of Letters and Science computer science degree. So she's really been generous with her time and support of our students here. We're really grateful to have you back. One interesting piece of information, for those of you who haven't heard her commencement speech, she's a sailor, a lifelong sailor, and in 1976 she was the national dinghy champion for women. So really diverse background, and you can see she's highly accomplished. So it's my pleasure to have a chat with her here today. So the first question, we collected questions from WIXI members, and so I have the pleasure of sort of sharing, having conversation, really using your questions. But I'll open it up to your questions towards the end. So the first question is not too hard, I hope. So transitioning from mechanical engineering to naval architecture to computer science, what made you decide to make these, seemingly big changes in your I guess, in your career path or your study?
Yeah. Okay. So first, let me just say, it's really, really great to be here. And Berkeley, well, okay, I'll answer the question, and maybe I'll be able to say these other things later. Yeah, I actually really started out, I wanted to go to film school, and I got into NYU, and my father wouldn't let me go, because New York was so dangerous before Michael Bloomberg. And so I went to University of Maryland, which was, I could just, if your SATs were over something, you could just sign up. And so I did mechanical engineering was kind of a fluke that I did it, but I did the mechanical engineering and thought I wasn't quite sure what I would do, but I did interview for jobs, and they were all desk jobs, which I really didn't want to do. And my chair of my department asked me what I was going to do, and I told him I thought I was going to go race sailboats. And he said, well, he had gone to MIT, and he said, you ought to go to MIT and study naval architecture if you like boats. And I was at Vermont, and they had this wonderful lake and a shipyard where I used to keep my boat and sail all the time. He said, you could come back and run that shipyard. And that was perfect. And so I did it, and then I lost interest in coming back to Vermont to run the shipyard, but I'm not sure I could have anyhow. But so I did the naval architecture because I love the ocean, and I did the mechanical engineering because I liked building things. So I basically have done always what seemed intriguing to do and what I wanted to do. And what happened was I came out to San Francisco really for the sailing. It was kind of tricky with a degree in naval architecture to get a job in San Francisco. All the jobs were in Texas in the oil industry. And so, and I really, actually, it's a long story, but I talked my way into that job. But I got here and I was in this consulting firm, and I was really windsurfing. I would sneak out of work about 3 o'clock every day and go windsurf on the bay. But but what happened was I had to learn. I taught myself. I wasn't able to. I was designing how to upend these huge jacket structures in the deep ocean, and I was designing how to moor semi-submersible platforms, and it was super interesting, except when it came time to deploy them, I didn't get to go out in the field because they didn't have quarters for women back then. And I kind of turned to computer programming, and I taught myself Fortran, and I was programming Fortran. And I was enjoying it. And when I'd been at MIT, I hung out with the people in the artificial intelligence lab. They happened to have an apartment upstairs from my apartment, and I got to know them really well. And that seemed super interesting. So finally, kind of out of frustration, the oil and, so I recently met Gloria Steinem. There's a reason I'm saying this. And I was asking her, when I went into computer science, I never felt held back, but I definitely felt quite held back in the oil industry. And I asked her about it, and she said, oh, it's obvious. Everybody knows that if you go into a profession that's well established, where there's money and prestige, the women can't get anywhere. But if you go into a brand new profession that doesn't have the norms set yet, and there's not yet all the money and prestige, people don't notice the gender. And it is true that when I came to Berkeley, it's now, I think, slightly higher, but the years I was there, I think, were the highest for percentage of women.
That's right, close to 30%.
Yeah.
I think. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In
so
the
it didn't.
80s.
Yeah, in the 80s.
Yeah.
So anyhow, so I was lucky, and I think that's what drew me. I was like, okay, here's this new fun thing to do, and then I didn't see any. I didn't feel like anybody was not letting me do what I wanted to do. And so that was how I got, anyhow, that's a long-winded answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you still like to build things? I mean, as a computer, in the cloud, that's kind of...
Yeah, I love to build things. That's what I do. I build things. I mean, right now I'm building an organization. Okay, and
that's right. Might be harder.
It is. It's the hardest thing I've ever done.
That's great. Okay, so you never thought of it as risky, sort of changing so dramatically your area of, I guess, your professional area?
Well, I think I'm missing the risk gene. I've never worried about. People always tell me I'm fearless. I'm not fearless at all.
Actually, maybe you can tell the audience your story of sailing out to in Hawaii, right?
Oh,
Hawaii
my commencement speech story.
Yes, right.
Well, so this is before I was married or had kids. I got a little more conservative after that, but I was in Hawaii with some friends and windsurfing, and I had one of my jobs, I ran engineering for Windsurfing International before I went back to grad school. I was very involved in the early days of windsurfing, and so we were over there windsurfing, and we thought, we were on Maui, and we said, hey, let's windsurf over to Molokai. There were 3 of us. It was another couple and me, and so we drove over to the coast with a 4th person that was there with us, who was a runner. She'd come over to Maui to run, but we were all friends, and so she dropped us off, and we took off to Molokai on our windsurfers. And we had a big argument about where to land, which I lost. And so we landed at this place on the island that was this huge ranch, and there was absolutely nothing there. And the wind completely died, and there were really big waves, and you couldn't get back out through the waves. So anyhow, I won't go into that story, but we had to do a lot of bushwhacking, and there were wild hogs, and it was really quite... but we had to spend the night there, and we came back the next day to windsurf across again. We had stashed our gear, and it was really windy. And so one of the couple and I immediately went out. We were more experienced, and then the third person was having a lot of trouble getting out with them in the waves, and so we went back in and we kind of talked about how to do it, and we went back out again, but she crashed on her way out, and her sail got ripped up, and so since she was the other person's girlfriend, he said, I got to stay with her. Why don't we just take the ferry back? And I said, well, that's going to mean another day in Molokai, and I'm just going to windsurf. And the wind was like really up to about 40 knots at that point, and I did. I just windsurfed across
by herself
from Molokai to Maui. It was probably a high point of my life. You know, I was zen with the water to do that. Like my toes were paying attention.
So this comes back to being bold, right? I mean, we need to encourage women to take risks. Maybe not that.
Well, you know, it's all a matter. I mean, I felt like I had it under control, and I don't, like, I've never skydived. That always seemed really risky to me. But I've never, I mean, I'm very happy living very simply, so I'm never worried about money. So I've never thought, oh, if I leave this, I won't be able to make as much money. That's never been a consideration. And so I think it's just a matter of saying, what's the worst possible thing that can happen, and what'll that be like if that horrible thing happens? And if that's okay, you can have a lot of courage.
Okay, that's a good
yeah.
a good way to look at it.
But because it frees you up to do what you want to do. Yeah,
makes sense. So a lot of the audience members here are still graduate students. So is there anything that you felt now, looking at your current position, that you thought that school didn't prepare you well for? Mm-hmm. And what would you have done differently to make sure that you were better prepared by the time you graduated?
Well, I was thinking about that, and one thing I just wanted to observe is things are really, really different now than when I was a graduate student, and there's a lot of going back and forth between universities and companies, and a lot of research both in the companies and in the universities. And I think there's tremendous opportunity when you're in grad school to experience what it's like to be in a company. You experience your research with your advisor. You want to figure out, you know, what you want to do. Do you want to be a professor? Do you want to work in a startup? Do you want to work in a big company? And there's a lot of opportunity to talk to the people that are out there doing all these things in a way that I don't think was necessarily true when I was in graduate school. And so I think that's an excellent thing. And then the other thing I was thinking about, I had this amazing experience when I'm to Google 2 years ago, and one of the groups that I was in, my group is Google Apps, you know, the Gmail and the Docs and the calendar and all that. And I walk in to meet the person that runs it, and it was this guy named Prabhakar Raghavan, who was a theory student when he was like the genius theory student when I was a grad student. I was in complete awe of him. And here he was managing this group, and I was going to get to work with him. And there in his office, he had won the Distinguished Alumni Award, and he showed it to me, and I was like, oh, I got that too. Anyhow, but I was just, it was an amazing experience. And the reason I tell you, and then another thing that happened was one of my office mates, who I was also in awe of and thought was a complete genius, was this guy named Anant Agarwal. And about a year ago, we bought his company, and he works for me now. And I mean, and I'm good friends with both, and I still think they're really brilliant people. And but it is to say that had I even remotely imagined it then, I might have had more confidence. And so it's just to say, think about, you know, when you're lacking in confidence, you never know what's going to happen.
I forgot to mention in my introduction of Diane, your most recent recognition was election to U.S. National Academy of Engineering. Congratulations.
Oh, that was amazing, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Never in my wildest dreams would I have anticipated that. And Prabhakar got that before me, too.
Oh. But now you can say, hey, I got that, too. See you at the next meeting.
Yeah, yeah. But I think it really is, you know, you kind of tend to beat yourself up, and then you know, as you go through life and quit worrying about what anybody thinks about you, you know, you get a lot more confidence, and it's a lot nicer to have it right when you start out. So just kind of force it on yourself.
Mm. Yeah. Well, do you think that if you had known in advance that you would become CEO, you know, of Google Cloud, and you know, on the board of directors for Google, which is now Alphabet, and all this National Academy, do you think you would have approached your career differently? I'm just curious. Maybe it's better that you didn't know that you were going to.
You know, I'm not sure. I mean, I do think that I'm kind of hardwired to only, like, I imagine what I want to do, and then, like, that's what I go do. And so, I mean, maybe different opportunities might have presented themselves, or I would have thought of different things. But I do think that, what was it? Somebody was up here saying that women weren't applying for faculty positions because they didn't think it was the perfect job for them, which I found really interesting, because I've never, you know, looked for the perfect job for me. I've just kind of dreamt up what I thought I wanted to do, and then kind of went after it. Except for my current job, I was recruited for that. But, you know, for the most part, every single thing I've done, I was like, this is what I want to go do, and then I kind of found a way to go do it. I mean, maybe I couldn't do exactly what I wanted to do, but I just think a really great way to approach your career is to think, you know, what is the best possible situation I could be in, and what am I most interested in? And then the last thing, make sure the people that are going to be in charge of you, if you're not in charge, are people you like and respect. And then, you know, it's so interesting. If you kind of know exactly what you want, it's really, it's not so hard to navigate to it. It's a lot harder if you're kind of looking for, well, what out there might fit me? That's a much harder way to approach something.
That's great. That's a good perspective. Thanks. So what challenges have you faced? Seems like you've, or are there any challenges that you're still working to overcome?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think because I am a little bit headstrong, I probably rub people the wrong way, and I'm continually working to be perceived as a you know, perceived better by people when we butt heads. But
so do you subscribe to this philosophy? It's better to ask for forgiveness rather than to ask for permission?
We should open it up to questions, but
okay, all right, okay. I can skip to the next one. Were there any surprising turns in your career path? Just looking back, do you think you're surprised by how it has turned out?
Yeah, I'm completely amazed by how it's turned out, and hopefully it's still going.
Of course.
I still want to do some other things, but you know, when I think back to myself as a kid, I was always organizing things. I really enjoyed getting the neighborhood together to do a play or whatever it was, and I really enjoyed skippering the boats. Like, I liked to be at the tiller and steering the boat and with the crew, and so in some ways, you know, I'm kind of still doing that. I haven't, but you know, the tech industry, the adventure of the tech industry has just been unbelievable. I mean, it's changing our whole world so rapidly, and it is, yeah, definitely been amazing to find myself in the middle of it, and a pleasant surprise.
That's great. Well, we're glad to have you in the middle of it. Why do you think there's so few women in the C-suite positions in the tech industry today?
Well, I mean, there definitely was a pipeline problem and sometimes I've had this conversation. A friend of mine that I got to know through MIT, she was actually the president of MIT for a while, says that, anyhow, we have this theory that maybe the rewards aren't there. Like, do you really want to be a CEO? It's like kind of lonely, and it's a lot of work, and you know, women aren't kind of out for fame and fortune necessarily, or, you know, it's, I mean, maybe they are, but, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it if you are, but it's just not, you know, maybe you would rather do your research, or maybe you want to have more time with your family, or maybe, so I think that might be partly the reason. I think the pipeline might be an issue. And then finally, you know, obviously, you know, I probably never would have been a CEO if I hadn't just built my own company. You know, I doubt I ever would have risen up in a big company, but because I built my own company and it became a huge company, I was a proven CEO of a big company. But I'm not sure. So I think it's definitely been hard for women to rise up. But why it was hard for them to rise up, I think there's a lot, or they didn't necessarily rise up, is I think there could be a lot of reasons.
Okay. So what is it like to be a CEO? Is it something that a lot of these people should aspire to?
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, if you really have this, I mean, if you really enjoy being, you know, being in charge, I don't actually tell people what to do in my job. I actually try and make all these people successful, and I just think it's incredibly fun to try and get everybody organized to make something happen, and which is sort of like skippering a sailboat. That's what you do. You organize everybody on the boat so you can win the race, and you know, but that's not what everybody likes to do. So I don't think it's the ultimate job. You know, I think probably, like, it's one thing that's very interesting when I think of my best friends, they're all professors. Every single one of my best friends is a professor.
Really? Do you want to be a professor someday?
No, I don't. It's not me, but I just find it, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, and there, you know, I have 3 computer science friends and a biologist and a botanist.
I think professors, we work hard to really try to have people around us, our research group members, succeed. So maybe there's a lot of, you know, similarity in the personality and goals, life goals. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. When I was on the visiting committee at MIT for mechanical engineering, and what's her name? Mary Boyce was the chair of the department at the time. She was the only woman in the mechanical engineering department for the longest time. And I used to meet with her, and I'm like, Mary, you could run any major corporation in the world. It was really obvious. She's now Dean of Engineering at Columbia.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of career paths for these aspiring CEOs or professors out there. Okay, maybe my final question, what advice would you give to, I guess, female students in EECS today?
One thing I just had to mention when I don't know if she's still here, the woman from Google that tried to have lunches, but it didn't work because the lunch is free. I tried to do the same thing, and I had exactly the same problem.
Wow.
And I'm going to try your idea of wine and cheese. But what's my advice? My advice is to really just, you know, I think it's a time where you can really easily sort of stand up for well, not easily, that's not fair to say. I think you can stand up for yourself. I'm sort of on a kick right now. This is going to sound really goofy, but I have this idea that the younger generation is pretty different from the older generation because of technology, and the younger generation doesn't really care what the older generation says, so I feel kind of silly giving advice.
No, I think, do you all want to hear her advice? Yes. See, there you go.
They seem to be wanting to blow up the whole thing and start over, but anyhow.
No, this is great.
Okay. What's my advice? I mean, I think that it is just so important to stay in touch with what it is that really, you know, tickles you, that makes you happy. And I think the hardest thing in the world is to be happy, but the best thing in the world is to be happy. And so if you do if you can pursue what you want to pursue so that it's under your control, you're pretty likely to be happy. But if you kind of subjugate that to someone else and you're dependent on them to do what you want to do and to be happy, it's going to be a lot more difficult. So, and one of the most important things is to pay attention to who is your advisor or who you work for. Or, I mean, the one thing I've done throughout my career is when I had a boss that it just didn't, they were not letting me do the things that I thought would be great to do, and really holding me back from doing things that I thought were really valuable to do, I just quit every time.
Wow.
Sometimes I got fired.
That's kind of risky.
Yeah.
So you don't think that's like a good example of taking a risk then? Or did you already have a job lined up before you quit?
No, I never lined up. But I just think it's, you want to surround yourself with the right people. I think who you surround yourself with is extraordinarily important.
Good advice.
I think I read that from Jacqueline Kennedy when she said, life's too short to not just associate with the people you like. And that's another way of saying that. But,
well put.
Yeah.
Great. I'd like to give members of the audience a chance to ask some questions as well. There's one here and then one over to our right.
And it's, by the way, being a CEO, it's been a gigantic advantage to be technical. Yeah.
Great. Good to know.
So when you're starting a startup, so you said some of them were sold and some of them you kind of kept them growing. How did you kind of decide whether to sell a startup, and when do you decide to stay on it and keep it independent from another company?
Or take it public.
Yeah, take it public.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a personal decision. I actually, one of my biggest company that I sold, I didn't want to sell it, but a lot of people convinced me it was too selfish of me not to sell it. I actually was right. We shouldn't have sold it, but but anyhow, I think if you're in charge, you just decide what you want to do and whether you believe you can make the. One of the things, if you're in charge of a company, is you understand the space probably better than anybody else in the world, because it's almost all that you think about. And so you're the expert, and unless someone can say something to you that shows you have a bad assumption, you really should just trust yourself, because you've thought about it more than they have. And so I think it's, if you think, if there's something you're trying to build that you think is going to get accelerated and you can make it better and bigger, and you like the company that wants to acquire you, maybe you let it be acquired. Or if things aren't working out, maybe you let it be acquired. But if things are going great and you're enjoying it and everybody's enjoying it and you see this path, they would be nuts to sell it. Yeah.
Okay, a question here?
So when I think about my future career, I think I could be faculty, or I could have a research career at Google or Facebook. But I also think that I would make a great CEO, but I just have no idea how I would start. And I guess you mentioned starting your own company, but I'm wondering how you got the courage to do that, or how you took steps to make that happen?
Well, so I started, my first job in tech was at Sybase, actually, a little database company in Emeryville that hadn't yet gone public. And what happened there, I was an engineer, and I was doing more and more, and I was working with the VP of engineering, who was a woman, and she got fired for a stupid reason. And she wanted to do SMP databases, and Sybase thought stored procedures were a better way to do databases, and she was right. But anyhow, I followed her to Tandem, and then at Tandem, she kept giving me really cool projects to do, to where I was sort of a technical leader, and she paired me up with some of Tandem's top technical people. And so I got a lot of experience kind of leading groups, but I was still an engineer. And then I went to SGI, and again, I was building this multimedia database, and it got to where it was such a big project, I couldn't do it all by myself, so they said, well, why don't you hire some people? So I became a manager for the first time. And so basically, and I kept almost, I never had a desire to be a manager, but I kept doing all these projects, and then they would need more and more people, so that then I would kind of be in charge of them. So that's one way, is, as you're in charge, as you drive something and you're building it and you need more people, you kind of naturally become a manager if you want to. And so then when I left, this is a funny story, when I left Tandem to do my first startup, it was a startup out of Stanford. I was the only one with any industry experience. And I'm sorry, I think that's my phone.
It's okay. Well, last question then.
No, I'm not saying I have to go. It's just I can't turn it off. But there, good. So then I went to do this startup with these people from Stanford. The professor I'd met because we shared daycare. My kid and his kid shared daycare, and they wanted me to be the VP of engineering. So I was like, okay, I can be a VP of engineering in a 5-person startup. And so we got the thing going, and I raised the money, and I got us incorporated because somebody had to do it, and it was kind of fun. And then we were out looking for a CEO for the little startup, and we couldn't convince anybody. We kept trying to recruit people, and they're like, they were not about to be our CEO, and they thought what we were doing was kind of crazy. And so then everybody said, well, you incorporated us and you raised the money, you should be the CEO. And so I said, okay, I'll be the interim CEO. And that was like how I became a CEO. And
wow. So you never aspired in the beginning to be a CEO.
And I remember when I was running VMware, I was a guy named Steve Lusso, who just retired from running Seagate. Someone told me I should bring him on my board, so I invited him in, and the first question he had for me, he goes, when did you know you wanted to be a CEO, and why did you want to be a CEO? And I looked at him and I'm like, I never wanted to be a CEO. And he just burst out laughing and said, neither did I.
Good story. Right, any final question for Diane?
But that's not to say a lot of, I mean, I had another board member after that. Ever since then, I've always asked CEOs that question. I thought it was a great question. And I had another board member that said, I knew when I was 10 years old. And,
Okay, one more question right here.
So it sounds like at a couple points in your career, you almost had an advocate or someone who was senior that helped get you the bigger projects, help take you to the next level on interesting companies. You mentioned the guy that got you into naval architecture, the lady that took you into databases and continued to grow. How do you identify those advocates or folks that are worth working with, where they'll continue to help grow your own career?
I should say, I met my husband at Berkeley, and he got his PhD at Berkeley, and he was a really good student. He won the ACM Distinguished Thesis Award, and he was a bit of a mentor too on the technology side, because I went to Berkeley without a CS background, so that was a good choice. It wasn't a conscious choice, but anyhow, we met with him giving me a motorcycle ride. But I don't seek the people out, but so Roberta Henderson, who was the VP of Engineering, it turned out just by chance, the office I sat in was right across the hall from her office. And so we just started joking around, and getting to know each other. And then I did this thing. I was the maintenance engineer, and they had me fixing the database. The log kept getting corrupted, and they had me stand there till midnight uncorrupting the log. And I noticed that it was like, a monkey could have uncorrupted the log. So I wrote a program to uncorrupt the log. So instead of something that took hours, it took a few seconds, and I could give it to the support engineers to do. And she saw that, and she's like, oh, I like that person. And so we became friends. And then she just kept giving me projects. So that was how I found her. And then when I went to Tandem, I kind of talk to everybody, and then I kind of find the people I like. And I guess I've been lucky that they've liked me back enough to put up with me. But yeah, I think it's hard to go up to someone and say, "Will you be my mentor?" I mean, I think you have to there has to be a two-way value proposition, I think, and so. I always try and help people as much as I can, but it's a lot easier to help someone if I'm working with them, because I'm really busy and I have my job to do. And so if I'm working with them, then I'm working with them all the time and I'm helping them be successful. But if they don't work with me, it's hard for me to make the time. And this is another way of saying that. When I went to get a board member for VMware, I thought, well, who do I need? And we were this virtualization layer sitting between Intel and the Microsoft Intel processors and the Microsoft operating system. And I thought, those are two monopolies. I really need a good board member here. And so I decided this guy, Larry Sonsini, who was the top attorney in Silicon Valley, the top deal maker. I was like, that's who I need for my board member. And I have really good reasons. So I got a meeting with him and I said, hey, I want you to be on my board. And he's like, I'm really busy getting off boards. He just smiled at me. But then we sat and we talked for about 3 hours about what what VMware was trying to do, and I took him through the whole thing, and it was a Friday night. It was pretty late, and I finally went home. And when I came in that morning, Monday, I had a message from him saying he joined my board, and he had I had never done anything like he was like this powerful, famous person, but I didn't want him for that. I never used him for a connection. I never used him to introduce me to someone. I used him to tell me how to write deals with these gigantic companies. And in fact, the reason he really wanted to do it was because Intel was telling us that we had to take an investment from them and they had to get our IP as part of the investment. And I said, well, and I didn't do it, and I told Larry about it, and he was like, David Noyes would be turning in his, is that his name?
Robert Noyce.
Robert Noyce would be turning in his grave. This is not how Intel should behave. And I think that's why he joined my board. And so, when you want a mentor, the way you get a mentor is you show, well, first you're going to be around them so you can work together, and then you show them why they're uniquely suited to be your mentor.
Good
Yeah.
advice. All right, I think our time is
Yeah.
past, but thank you
Okay.
so much,
Okay.
Diane, for sharing with
Yeah.
us your story. Very inspiring.